This is Lofoten, an Arctic archipelago in Nordland, Norway, at 68 degrees north. 169 kilometers above the Arctic Circle, more than 2,400 kilometers from the North Pole. By every honest reading of a map, this should be a frozen edge. In midwinter, the sun stays below the horizon for weeks. The mountains rise from the water like a wall. There is almost no inland to hide in. And yet, about 24,500 people live here. They live in a latitude that should lock the harbours in ice, and does not. A warm Atlantic current keeps the sea open through the dark. And every winter, from the Barents Sea, the great Arctic cod swims south to spawn on these grounds. For 1,000 years, that arrival has been the reason a civilization exists on this coast. So how do people live where the Arctic meets the sea? And what turned a wall of stone into one of the oldest working landscapes in the north? Lofoten is not one island, it is a chain. Austvorgøya, Gimsøya, Vestvågøya, Flakstadøya, Moskenesøya. Then, still farther out, Værøy and Røst, where the land finally thins into the Norwegian Sea. Together, the municipalities cover a little more than 1,200 square kilometers. That is not a large country. It is a long, broken ridge of rock dropped into cold water, stretching roughly 200 kilometers out from the mainland of Nordland. The nearest city of any size is Børde, across the Vestfjord. Oslo is another country in practice, a flight, a change, then a smaller aircraft into Svolvær or Leknes, or a long drive north until the road itself becomes the islands. Until 2007, parts of this chain still asked for a ferry. Then, the Lofast connection opened, and the E10 tied the main islands to the rest of Norway by bridge and tunnel. The map looks continuous now. The weather is not. A winter storm still closes the high crossings. A fishing boat still treats the Vestfjord as a working hazard, not a view. Røst sits at the outer end, low, wind-cut, almost nothing between the houses and the open Atlantic. From there, the next land west is a long thought. This is isolation with a postcode. Children still go to school. There are two towns, Svolvær and Leknes. There is a supermarket, a clinic, a harbour office. But the Arctic Circle is not a line painted for tourists. It is the reason the year splits into a season of light and a season of dark. And why every family here still listens to the sea before it listens to a timetable. The land did not offer them a gentle coast. It offered them a wall. From the sea off Børde, Lofoten does not look like a cluster of islands. It looks like a single rampart, the Lofoten Wall, a face of rock some 100 kilometers long and 800 to 1,000 meters high. That wall is old. These peaks are the worn roots of a mountain chain far older than the ice that later carved them. Granite and gneiss, lifted, scoured, and left standing when the glaciers retreated. The ice did not soften the islands, it cut them. It left cirques, knife ridges and harbours that exist only because a glacier once needed a way out to the Vestfjord. The highest summit in the chain, Higraftinden, stands 1,146 meters above the sea. In most of Europe, that would be a mountain inland, with valleys and farms at its feet. Here, the feet are water. Villages occupy the scraps of shore the ice forgot to take. Pocket beaches, river mouths, the lee of a headland. There is almost no deep hinterland. Vestvågøya is the exception, broader, greener, the old agricultural heart, which is why it still holds the largest share of the population, around 11,600 people. The other islands are thinner. A road, a strand of houses, then the wall again. That geology is the first law of Lofoten. You do not build on the mountain, you build against it, or you do not build. Every harbour is a negotiation with wind direction. Every farm is a negotiation with the few patches of soil the ice left behind. The famous postcard, red cabin, peak, mirror water, is not a design. It is what remains when stone takes everything else. Even the beaches are a geological joke. Unstad, on the ocean side of Vestvågøya, is a curve of sand facing the open Norwegian Sea, as if the Arctic had misplaced a fragment of a gentler coast. The same rock that makes the wall also focuses the swell. The land is not trying to be beautiful, it is trying to stand. Stone decided where a person could sleep. The sea decided whether they could eat. The second law is light. From late May until mid-July, from the 25th of May to the 17th of July, the sun does not set. The midnight sun is not a metaphor. It is a working problem. Sheep still need moving. Fish still need landing. Sleep becomes a decision, not a given. The islands fill with visitors who have come to see the light. The people who live here have to use it. Then the year turns. From the 14th of December to the 6th of January, the sun does not clear the horizon. This is not the deep polar night of Svalbard. Lofoten sits far enough south that the dark is a long blue dusk, mørketiden, the murky time. A few hours of steel light at midday, then the return of night. Street lamps burn at noon. The mountains become silhouettes. The aurora, when the sky is clear, writes itself over the same harbours that were gold in June. Between those two extremes sits the reason anyone could stay at all. The sea does not freeze. The North Atlantic Current, the last reach of what most people call the Gulf Stream, bathes this coast in water far warmer than the latitude has earned. Lofoten is one of the largest temperature anomalies on Earth at this height. Winter air is still hard. Storms still arrive without apology. But the harbours remain open. Cod can spawn. A boat can leave. That open water feeds more than people. Sea eagles work the same channels as the fishing fleet. Puffins and kittiwakes pack the bird cliffs of Røst and Værøy in summer. West of Røst, in deep water, lies the Røst Reef, among the largest cold water coral reefs yet mapped. The postcard is peaks and cabins. The real wealth is a current that should not be this kind, running past rock that should not be this inhabited. None of this would have held a town if the fish had not come. People have used this coast for a very long time. Traces of settlement go back at least 11,000 years. The earliest clear sites sit around 5,500 years old, at the turn from the early to the late Stone Age. This was never an empty postcard waiting for a hotel. By about 250 years before the Common Era, there is farming and livestock on the better land, especially on Vestvågøya. The wall still rules the horizon. The soil in the pockets was enough. Then the sea wrote a town. Vågan, on the southern shore of eastern Lofoten, at what is now Kabelvåg, is the first known town formation in northern Norway. It was already there in the early Viking Age, perhaps earlier. Around the year 1100, the catch and the drying of cod were large enough to support a real settlement, a church, fishermen's lodging, a place where a winter fleet could land and sell. Inland from the modern road, at Bor, archaeologists found the largest Viking longhouse yet known, 83 meters of timber, now rebuilt as the Lofoten Museum. This was not a camp, it was power, sitting on the one island fat enough to feed both cattle and a chieftain, while the harbours below fed Europe. The pattern has not really changed. The good soil stayed on Vestvågøya, the money stayed on the quays. Kabelvåg held the medieval centre for centuries, until the late 19th century, when the weight of trade shifted a few kilometres to Svolvær, which had the deeper, more modern harbour. The names moved, the reason did not. A town can be founded for many things. This one was founded for a fish that arrives in the dark. The machine that made Lofoten livable is not a dam or a tunnel. It is a temperature. Every winter, from January into April, northeast Arctic cod leave the Barents Sea and swim south to spawn. On that journey, they are called skrei. Most of the spawning happens between Rost and the mainland side of the archipelago, on the Vestfjord grounds. The world's richest winter cod fishery still gathers here. The fish cannot all be eaten fresh, they never could. The solution is older than the Hanseatic warehouses of Bergen, older than the word stockfish in any tourist brochure. The winter air in Lofoten sits just below freezing, not cold enough to shatter the flesh into ice, not warm enough to let it rot. The catch is split, hung on wooden racks, yell, and left in the wind. No salt, no smoke. Sun and air from late winter into spring until the fish is bone dry, light enough to ship, and still holding the protein that once fed Catholic Europe on Fridays. From the 12th century, cargo vessels took that cargo south to Bergen. German merchants sent it on into the cities of the north. Prices rose and fell for centuries. In the hard centuries, the coast starved with the market. In the good ones, the Lofoten season was the main cash of northern Norway. Today, most of the dried fish still leaves for Italy. Fresh skrei flies to restaurants. The rack on the shoreline is not decoration. It is a factory with no roof. The second half of the machine was a hut. Rorbuer were not designed for a weekend. They were fishermen's shacks on the tide line, often on poles, so a crew could step from bunk to boat. A whole crew in one room. Boys came at 14, newly confirmed, and stayed from January to April. The hut existed because the fish did not wait, and the walk from a warm inland farm was too far. The modern twin of that machine is a road. The E10, the bridges, the tunnels, the small airports at Svolvær and Leknes. These are how a nurse, a teacher, a mechanic stay through the months when the racks are empty. They did not replace the wind. They made it possible to live beside it year-round, instead of only for the season. The fish still arrive in the dark. The wind still does the work a factory would charge for. Everything else is how you remain after the boats come in. Once a coast learns to live by a season, the rest of the year has to justify itself. Dawn in winter is a rumour. The fleet has often already left. In Svolvær, the town wakes as a harbour first and a postcard second. This is the municipal centre of Vågen. Shops, the regional boats, the place a spare part can still be found when the weather allows. Above the water, Svolværgata, the goat, is a horn of rock the town has learned to live under. The goat is not the day's business. The key is. West along the shore, Henningsvær sits on a clutch of islets stitched by bridges, a village that still behaves like a fishery even when the galleries are open. In winter, the pulse is the landing. In summer, it is cameras. The same narrow streets do both jobs, and they do not do them quietly. On Vestfogøya, Leknes works to a different clock. School runs, the airport, the wider farms, the least theatrical of the Lofoten towns, and therefore the one that most resembles ordinary Arctic life. This is where many of the 11,000 on the island actually spend Monday. Farther west, the road thins. Flakstad, then Moskenes, Hamnøy, Reine. Reine is the image the world stole. Red timber, a neck of water, peaks arranged as if someone had composed them. At 7 a.m. in March, it is a working slipway. Racks, a boat being readied, a person in oilskins who did not get up for the view. The mountain called Reinebringen looks down on a village that still has to get the catch off the deck before the light, such as it is, goes again. At the end of the chain, Røst keeps another clock entirely. Weather windows, the bird season, the last harbour before the reef and the open sea. There is no mountain wall here, only low land and the knowledge that the next help is a flight or a boat. Somewhere between those harbours, a winter table still makes sense of the whole coast. Mølja, cod, liver and roe, sometimes the tongue, is not a restaurant invention. It is what you eat when the fish you live by is also the food in the house, protein and the fat that the dark requires. Dusk in June may not come. Dusk in December arrived at 3. Either way, the day is measured in landings, not hours. The picture sold around the world is this coast at rest. The people who stay know it only as a coast at work. About 25,000 people live on these islands. Around 1 million visitors now come in a year. That is not a rivalry of feelings, it is arithmetic. 40 guests for every resident. Spread across a road that is often a single lane of weather, through villages whose winter housing was built for crews, not for a second home. The rorbuer is the clearest example. A hut that existed so a fisherman could sleep beside his boat is now one of the most valuable beds in northern Norway. Whole rows have left the fishery and entered the summer market. That is income. It is also a subtraction. A seasonal worker, a young family, a teacher on a one-year contract looks at the same shoreline and sees a rent they cannot meet. The E10 carries the load. In July, it crawls. Parking fills the verges at every famous lay-by. The path up Rheinebringen, rebuilt to stop erosion, still wears the mountain thin. Motorhomes queue for a toilet, a bin, a patch of grass that is someone else's winter field. Locals are not props in this. Many work the hotels, the boats, the galleries. The harbour is shared on purpose. Tourists in summer, skrei in winter, the same quay doing two economies. The wound is not that visitors come. The wound is that the postcard is now more profitable than the work that invented the postcard. And the work still has to happen, in the dark, for the place to remain itself. Housing, seasonal crowding, a fishery that must share the dock with people who have come to photograph the dock. None of this is unique to Lofoten. It is simply more visible here because there was never much flat land to absorb 1 million extra bodies. What the world loves about these islands was built for a different purpose. That purpose has not expired. The red house was a tool before it was a symbol. Coastal timber in Norway was often painted with cheap iron oxide red, a pigment that protected wood and could be bought when better colours could not. The rorbuer is red because red was what a working hut received. The peak behind it did the rest. The drying rack is the same story. Hjell are triangles of timber tall enough to walk under because the catch of a whole season had to hang in moving air. They photograph well. They were built so a family would still have money in May. Stockfish is not a souvenir. It is a technology, a climate used as a factory. The taste Italians still pay for is a winter wind captured. When the racks fill, Lofoten smells like its own history. When they stand empty, you are looking at a machine between shifts. Even the language of the place is practical. Skrei is not a poetic word for cod. It names a migrating animal on a clock. Rorbuer is a rowing hut. Lofotveggen is a wall. People here have always preferred accurate nouns. Culture followed the tool, not the other way around. The Viking longhouse at Borg sat on farming land because power needed grain as well as fish. The medieval town at Vågen sat on a harbour because the Hanseatic cargo did not load itself from a mountain. The galleries in Henningsvær sit in old industrial rooms because the rooms were already there, facing the water. If you take the work away and leave only the look, you are left with a film set. The identity that lasts is the one that can still hang fish in a north wind and call that a living. A place is not what it resembles. It is what it still knows how to do. They stay because the year still makes sense. Not an easy sense. The dark is real. The storms are real. The rent is real. A young person can leave for Tromsø or Oslo and find a flatter life by Friday. Some do. The ones who remain are not performing endurance. They are keeping a calendar that begins when the skrei arrive and does not end when the last camper drives south. The current still keeps the harbours open. The wall still tells every builder where a house may stand. The wind still dries the catch for nothing. Those three facts have not been repealed by a bridge, an airport, or a million photographs. Lofoten will change. It already has. Winter tourism now fills months that used to belong only to the fishery. The climate that makes the anomaly famous is the same climate the rest of the Arctic is watching. A warmer winter is not a gift to stockfish. The machine only works in a narrow band of cold. So the question is not whether the islands will remain beautiful. Beauty is the part that needs no help. The question is whether they will remain a coast that works. Whether a child growing up in Rein or Karbovorg will still be able to read the year in racks and landings, not only in booking calendars. Home here is not convenience. It is a latitude that should have been impossible, made livable by a current, a fish, and a people who learned the difference between a view and a living. This is Lofoten, where the Arctic meets the sea, and where some people still meet it back. If you have lived a winter on this coast, or another like it, the details that never reach a brochure belong in the comments. The next film in this series stays with places that weather still runs.